name is Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
I hope I pronounce her name properly. Thais Gibson.
I am so excited for you to be here with me today. Thank you for joining us. Welcome back to another episode of Can This Be Fixed with our co-host, Mike DeZio. And if you didn't already know and haven't been following the show, or this is your first time here, we are both two ex-avoidants. I used to be a fearful avoidant for all of my life into my late teens and early 20s. And Mike used to be a dismissive avoidant and has also done the work to become secure. So we on this show sort of share from like two ex-avoidance perspectives, answers to your questions. And we talk about some of like our own inner world and experiences so that we can help you and support anyone listening in trying to understand either themselves a little bit more if you relate to us and our situations, or help understand your partner, your ex, whoever it might be in your life, maybe even a family member or a friend. So in today's episode, we are going to be covering, first and foremost, a personal share. So what we're going to share here today is if after becoming securely attached, there's something that we still struggle with. And if so, what is that personal thing that we're going through right now, or maybe struggling with in relationships? It can be anything big or small. So we're going to kick off with that. And then we are going to dive into no contact with a dismissive avoidant. What do you do? And we're going to share a different question from our Reddit thread from Ray's Present 3142, who posted all about no contact with the DA, what it means at day 45 when the person starts reaching out indirectly, and what can you do? So stay tuned. And first and foremost, and I guess I'll ask this question to you, Mike, and then I'll answer as well. As we kick off with a personal share, what would you say was one of the biggest things you struggled with as a dismissive avoidant? And what is one of the things that you are currently struggling with as a securely attached person?
So in the past, one of the biggest things that I struggled with probably was just literally thinking I was defective. I always thought there was something wrong with me. So I would go into like interactions. I actually didn't date in high school at all because I always thought if anybody was being nice to me or like, flirting, I thought they were just being polite or that they act that way toward anybody. I never thought somebody would actually like me. Like I always thought, no, I was way too messed up or too quiet or too weird and strange. So I really like beat myself up a lot. And, if you don't think you're good enough, your inner voice is probably telling you like, why are you like this? And, why were you born like this? I was angry with my parents. I was like, why did you have me? Like I thought it was just terrible. And it's kind of sad to think about now when I kind of look back on it. It's so foreign now, thank God. Like I don't think that way of myself anymore. But yeah, it was really tough because you can imagine going into like a party or going into a room or a social setting and you thinking that everyone's going to find out that you're messed up. Everyone's going to find out that you're weird and awkward and socially, don't know what you're doing. So yeah, there was just so much fear. I just remember now it's kind of coming back to me. It was just, I was always in like a state of fear and like really trying to hide myself, and I wouldn't open myself up to people because I thought there was so much shame and I had to cover up so much of myself. So a lot of my early life was spent sort of, hiding, masking, and just really hoping people wouldn't see me for who I really was.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
And can I ask you a sort of side note question to that, just as you're sharing that? Do you feel like there's anything that was like kind of a hidden blessing that came out of that, as hard as that is and as sort of treacherous as it is to feel like that, to help you like become more independent and like trust yourself? Or like did anything come out of it in a like silver lining kind of way?
I guess maybe the fact that there would be certain people that would pop into your life that actually made you feel really good, and you could kind of put all that stuff to the side when you're with those kind of people. So there's just certain people out there and they're just so lovely, who I know we all judge, like it's a normal part of human nature to judge others. But there's a certain people out there, and maybe our listeners can vouch for this. I just find there's certain people out there who just, they don't have that like judgment sort of vibe to them. Like when you're with them, like it's like they don't care who you are. They're just happy that you're with them. So I don't know if that's like a positive that came from it, but I just remember thinking those kind of people were really rare, and those kind of people are super special. So
That's nice.
when you did find those kind of people, then you knew, okay, at least I'm not totally alone in this world. And there's a few people I can spend time with and have some relief from those sort of really negative fear-based thoughts. So,
Wow.
yeah.
I think too, knowing you, which is interesting. I just thought about this after I asked the question, but I think part of you, probably because you were in suffering so much, you went and sought things out and like did the work and showed up. And sometimes like it takes enough pain and suffering to actually get to that point too. And so one of those sort of maybe hidden blessings is that you actually kind of found yourself through your suffering as well.
That's very true. And one other thing I'll share as well too. So before, I didn't know that there was any way out. I just thought this is how I was, and this is the way that I'm going to be for my whole life. So I ended up going the pharmaceutical route. I thought, you know what, I need to fix my defective brain, and I need to take pills, and these will make me feel better. I will say it did have an instant impact, and I get a lot more confidence. I got a lot more relief from anxiety and worrying about stuff, which was great. But then I just thought, you know what, I don't want to do pills for my whole life. And I was starting to sort of dabble in the personal development world and seeing sort of what was possible, what was out there. So I guess my motivation was as well, I don't want to have to take the pills for my whole life. So I'm going to start to try to change some of these things that are really causing me a hard time. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
And I know you, and we're dear friends, so I know your story, but for anybody listening, so what's the end story of that? How did that story end? Did you end up getting off the pills? What was the path?
Yeah, for sure. So actually, give me an idea. We should tell our origin story on one of the upcoming podcasts. Yeah, no, one of the big helpers was when I met you. You taught me a lot of really good subconscious programming tips and sort of how to get out of the funk and the fog. Yeah, it was a combination of, I just kind of went all in on
You showed
healing.
up so well. Yeah.
I had the rock bottom, and I just said enough is enough. So I actually quit the job that I had, and I just said, you know what, I'm going to make it my full-time job to like work on healing. So I spent a good 6 or 8 months not working, and literally every day to read, reprogram, go to seminars, webinars.
Meditate.
Like I was meditate. Oh, every day I was meditating. It was amazing. And yeah, like literally profoundly changed me. That was about 8 or 9 years ago. And yeah, I haven't taken any pills for over a decade now, which I'm really happy about.
Incredible. And yeah, like disclaimer for anybody, we're not sitting here saying like go off your antidepressants. Like that's a really personal experience. It should be dealt with your psychiatrist and all of that. But I also was on antidepressants for a few months in high school, not very long, maybe a year. Sorry, not even high school, end of like summer after high school, going into first year university. And yeah, anyways, that's its own story. That wasn't, I sort of had other things to work on, but yeah, I just want to say, something that's so funny, and this is kind of like between us, but I guess listeners will hear this too, is like, when you were saying that, like everything that you felt about yourself and all how hard you were on yourself, it's funny because in my head, I was like, that's so sad. Like, I can't believe you felt that bad. And then like, you were like, oh yeah, like we have to tell our origin story, how we met. And like you were going through a really hard time, but you're in such a different space that like, it feels like almost like my own journey, like how I suffered a lot too. And it feels like it's like very own distant past, almost in a way where I can't feel like connected to it in the same way at times. And I feel like when you told that story, even though I knew you during a hard time of your life, it was like, oh yeah, like it seems so foreign that I'm hearing you say that. But like, of course that was your reality. Like that's like part of what made us friends, I think. Like that was part of how we like grew a friendship. And so it's just crazy, like to hear that, but also to think of how far you've come, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, no, I agree. Seems like a distant memory. Like, did that even really happen? But I get reminded sometimes. One of my good friends, Robin, we lost touch for a long period of time. And when we reconnected, she was just blown away. Like, she was just like, you are a different person. Like, I don't even know who I'm talking to right now.
Wow.
She said that in a joking way, but she brings that up every so often. And I think it's really funny because, we're with ourselves every day. So it's hard to see these big shifts, but obviously there was a major shift. And even just talking about it right now, like hearing some of the things that I used to say to myself and my inner thoughts, like, that's kind of crazy, but that's the way it was at that time. So
That was such a good share. Okay, so tell us now, what's the thing you're going through or struggling with now? What's like the thing maybe in
yeah.
like a relationship or in relationships and as a whole, like in your, now that you become securely attached and really work through like probably a form of clinical depression.
Mhm.
Where are you sitting at now?
Yeah, so I like to focus too on like the things I can do now that I couldn't do before. I think that's like true growth when you can see the things you can do now that you couldn't do before. So, but talking about the things that I still struggle with, there's definitely some things, that's for sure. One of them that popped into my mind when you asked the question was sometimes I still do have a little bit of guilt about taking space and speaking up for the need for space.
Mm.
Let's say that I have plans with someone, plans with a significant other, and we have a plan for, let's say, like the whole day. Then maybe around hour 5 or hour 6, for whatever reason, I'm not feeling great. And I really know that I need to sort of be by myself. I need some alone time. I need to get back to myself. And then maybe I can come back and join or whatever. But I still get a little worried that if I say something like that, my partner, the person I'm with, is going to get really offended and be like, "Oh, like what is it me? Like what? You can't be around me right now. Like what's what did I do? That's so terrible." But really, it obviously has nothing to do with them. It's just my body's giving me signals that, hey, I think you need a bit of a breather, and just go off and do your thing for half an hour, and then you can return later if you want. So I think there's still a worry that the person will get offended or be like, that's so weird. Like, what's wrong with it?
It's so interesting because so you're also introverted. And I think that there's a natural inclination for like introverts to like need to pull away to recharge sometimes and just to like do their own thing for a little bit or have like silence, like quiet.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because this really just came up for like me thinking about this now, how there's almost this like intermediary period where before you're in like a super serious relationship or like living with somebody,
Mhm.
there's like this weird like in between zone where sometimes like like you live with somebody and like Graham and I live together and if I need space or time alone or he needs that, we'll just do that even if we're in the same room. Like I'll just do my own thing, start reading a book or he'll start doing something, listening to a podcast and like we'll do our own thing and you get into that like very natural zone. But when you're
Mhm.
still kind of in that like dating or honeymoon stage, it's like not natural yet to do that. And so I think that like, even though you've become securely attached, that introverted moment, it's like that there's still that work to do for those small moments of being able to say like, hey, I'm just gonna do my own thing for a little in the other room, or I'm just gonna, and just being able to share that makes a huge difference, I think.
So true. You almost have to hide like what you really want most in that moment because you're
Yeah.
like, it's early dating. It'd be a little weird to, say like, hey, I wouldn't mind a nap right now. Like, do you want to take a nap together? Like, you can't really say that on the first date. No, pretty awesome. But yeah, no, it's that intermediate period is kind of funny. But I guess if something comes up, you should sort of say it. Like the earlier you sort of show people who you are, the better.
Yeah.
I definitely, if I go on dates, like I don't want to ever sell myself as someone that I'm not. I'm in a bit of an old man phase now. I like going to bed at like 10 p.m. at night. I don't drink anymore. I don't party. So before, I think I would try to like act like, hey, I'm cool and I do crazy stuff sometimes. But really, I'm not like that anymore. And I want to attract someone who's also in that sort of vibe, who's more into like health and getting a good night's sleep. So yeah, the more authentic you can be sort of early on, the more you don't have to drop these things later on and maybe disappoint someone.
Yeah.
So
I love
yeah.
that. I love that. Cool. Okay, that was a great share. Hello, our lovely listeners. I have something really special lined up for you in today's episode. I'm excited to share a free workbook exercise that's exclusively for our podcast listeners. And this workbook, as you'll come to see in today's discussion, will help you dive more deeply into some of what I'm going to talk about repairing my own challenges around trust and how you can replicate that system that I've developed to also do some of that same work and really put the insights I'm hoping from today into practice, because this is something, having been a fearful avoidant, that I really struggled with. And I'm hoping that this can be something really meaningful and impactful for you. So you'll get a sneak peek of our popular course, Rebuilding Trust and Overcoming Jealousy in Your Relationships. And from that course, I'll be sharing 2 powerful exercises, specifically the part around trust in the workbook. And these exercises will guide you through assessing your trust levels and trust violations. And all you really need is a pen and paper. So you sort of get those 2 parts of the course. You get the trust part, and then the jealousy part is sort of tacked on in that course as well. You can also access this exclusive freebie, Rebuilding Trust and Overcoming Jealousy workbook, through the link in the description box below. And with these exercises, you will learn to navigate trust challenges and really strengthen your relationships as a result, including self-trust and the relationship to you as well. So I hope you enjoy the workbook and keep listening for more exclusive content and freebies coming your way. So I guess I'll share for a moment. So most vulnerable thing I used to struggle with, it's funny, probably very similar to you, just like terrible internal dialogue. Like, I think that was the root cause, if I'm just looking at like root of so many other issues I was experiencing, like struggling with addiction, being a fearful avoidant, all these things. I think like that root cause was just how like cruel I was to myself and my own internal dialogue. And I think I kind of oscillated from really putting myself down all the time and feeling like unworthy and never good enough, and just so many like negative things that I would tell myself, oh, I'm such an idiot, I'm so stupid, like all these things all day long. But the other flip side I would kind of go back and forth between was also like kind of hyper suspicion of other people, which is so funny to me now because I just like don't experience that. Like, I'll be cautious. I'm not going to like give a stranger my wallet at night on the, in downtown Toronto or something. But I used to just oscillate like in my internal dialogue, being like, why would somebody do that? What are they really thinking or meaning? And being all suspicious and kind of like stressed by people and so hyper vigilant. And between that and then really putting myself down. And it's just like such an exhausting way to think and feel. Yeah. And I think one of the biggest things for me that changed is how much more like life energy you get back by not spending so many of your daily thoughts beating yourself up or putting yourself down or like worrying about things with people and constantly being like so stressed that this means this and that must mean that. And instead just being able to like really, through a lot of like reprogramming work that you and I have both done, changing those core wounds that I'm unworthy, I'm bad, I'm stupid, I'm not good enough, I'm unlovable, I'm all these different things. I'll be betrayed, I'll be abandoned. Like all those core wounds are the root that really sparks so much of that really, really negative internal dialogue. And it's a heavy load to carry. And how much like freer and clearer your mind feels and how much you can focus on like creating cool things or ideas or learning things or taking up new hobbies or like connecting with people in a more harmonious way when you don't have that whole internal dialogue space just be so dark. That's like such a game changer for sure.
Oh yeah, I imagine. Just for my understanding, from the FA perspective, what do you think it was? Why were you so suspicious of people? Like, did you think people were out to get you, or you couldn't trust anyone? Like, you thought literally like everybody had sort of some ulterior motive against you?
Not quite. Like, it wasn't like a paranoia. It was like that when I would get close to people, that then they would like betray or abandon me. Like I just couldn't trust to like be vulnerable or to rely on people or really to open up. And a lot of the reading between the lines would be like, okay, they did this, so they're pulling away, so they're about to leave. Or they told this story one way, 3 weeks ago, and now it's changed a little bit. And then I would get in my head and be like, so can I really trust this person? Are they going to hurt me? Should I even be bothering like being in a relationship with them? Can I even connect with this person? And and are they who I think they are? Like a lot of that kind of stuff. And then I guess like almost like a third part would be I would really like a huge part of me at the time that was fearful avoidant would be so over giving and never, ever, ever take myself into consideration at all. And so give, pour into people and then operate from the space of codependency and these covert contracts and think like, oh, I'm giving so much, this person should just naturally give back. And when they wouldn't, I'd feel taken advantage of. So a lot of the time I would kind of be waiting for somebody to like try to manipulate me or take advantage of me. And like that would be there in the background too. And then, so I guess I would say like that was probably like 20% of my internal dialogue was that kind of stuff. Like if I had to put some kind of numbers around it, that wasn't the majority. But I would just be very hypersensitive to like incongruencies or changes in a story or changes in a person's behavioral pattern. And I would spend a lot of time analyzing that. And funny enough, like when I think of it now, was there a silver lining? For sure that like I suffered enough. I had to do the work, but a silver lining for me too is I think it's actually part of what helped me like become pretty good at reading people and like human behavior. Cause I would always be like so much of my time throughout the day for years and years and years was, why did they do that? Why did they do this? Why did they do this? And the why? And then seeking answers to those questions. And over time, it helped me like understand people in a really healthy way when I got all my own core wounds out of the way, which is kind of interesting.
Those are such good insights and they make a lot of sense. And one last follow-up I'm really interested to know about. With the trust wounds for the FA, I remember when I was coaching before, you have to find proof of the opposite. And a lot of times FAs would tell me, I don't have any proof of somebody not breaking my trust. I've had my trust broken by every single person I've ever dated. Is that them just having a very narrow focus of seeing, okay, I've been hurt many times by people, and they're not seeing the other people who actually treated them really well? Might not have been a romantic relationship, might have been parents or best friends or whatnot. But when you hear an FA saying like they don't have anything to pull from, how do you sort of even go back from that? How do you reprogram that?
It's such a good question. So, it was so interesting. So for me, the way that was the fastest way for me to really reprogram this is I had a big wound with one specific person in my family. I had wounds, actually, I can't say one specific person. There was definitely like multiple. But I had it really focused on one person, maybe in an imbalanced way. And with, I want to respect like my family's privacy. But I sat down and I decided to work on that. Like there was one specific experience that I was really holding on to tightly and I was like really resenting and I had a lot of like just kind of like emotional poison around and I sat down and I wrote, okay, I was betrayed. And I was so sure. Of course I was betrayed. And it's not that when we're betrayed, we're not betrayed. It's that what happens when we go through a traumatic event is our perception skews, right? Something imprints our subconscious mind and it skews and we see one side of the trauma and we don't see the whole picture. And that lopsided view of things, how that stores creates, a core wound and then lopsided perceptions of our whole worldview, the more that we have that. And so I had all this like betrayal, people will betray me. And then I went back and I looked at this one experience that I was holding on to really tightly. And I was like, okay, this person betrayed me. Okay, what's the opposite? This person was loyal. And what I found is that after I felt betrayed by this person in my life, I shut them down so much and I shut them out so much. And I was so hard on them. And like, I was terrible at forgiving until I was like, a little older and did a lot of this deeper work. Which funnily enough, like now actually comes kind of naturally to me. Like I naturally forgive. It's crazy because I was literally the opposite. But I sat down and I was like, okay, they betrayed me. They are like a betraying person. Is it true? And I looked for where there was loyalty. And I was actually sitting in a Starbucks coffee shop doing this work, thinking like, oh, I'm just going to do this, see what comes up for me, which was like, I should have known not to do this in a Starbucks coffee shop. But I was sitting there in a Starbucks and I was like, they were loyal to me. Now, this is somebody really close to me. And what I found in that moment is when when I really looked and was willing to look for the other side of the story, after there was the betraying event, no matter how much I shut that person down, tried to not talk to them, tried to cut them out of my life, tried to do all these things to like, I guess like self-protect, they would still reach out and keep trying. And that was loyalty. And that was this like cherishing and loyalty, which are sort of the opposite emotions and belief patterns to betrayal. And I sat there in the Starbucks and it was like in slow motion. I had these sunglasses on my head and I like put them on my face because I was like, oh, I'm going to cry in this friggin' public place. Because it was like a relief cry, like a deep feeling of relief. And I put the sunglasses on and then I was like, oh no, I'm really going to cry. And I like went to the bathroom and thank God there was nobody there. And I shut the door and I bawled. And it was like such a freeing feeling. And it's not, so this is like an equilibrating technique. There's like a lot of stuff behind this in terms of how this works and going into earlier memories. And there's some of this in like our programs at PDS. But I, in that moment, probably experienced like the most like profound feeling of forgiveness I had ever felt. And it doesn't mean that there wasn't a betrayal. It's just that when you see the whole perspective, and I know you know this, I'm kind of explaining it to the listeners, but when you see the whole perspective, it like equilibrates it and it gets it out of like your body, your mind, it felt like somebody sucked like black out of my heart, like just like poison that I was carrying. And it was such a big relief. And so I think that a part of there's more, I'll answer the whole question, but it was such a big relief. But, so that was a first big piece. Now, like when you look at like times people have betrayed you, right? It's almost like trying to look. So going back to your original question, you said, if somebody's stuck on this core wound of betrayal, like, what do you do? So that was like my rabbit hole. You don't necessarily sit and do that. You can do that. You can look for people who you felt like you're holding on to betrayal where they also had loyalty. And so it's not just this only, but it can be like a both. And that can be really healing and really freeing and really profound. But I also would recommend doing that in like a proper way, like maybe coming into our programs at PDS and using like our tools in there to do it and go through the steps properly. Because if you just try to sit down, it may not work just from the way I described it. There's like a bit of a system and a process to it. The second part is that I didn't fully heal my trust wounds until I coupled autosuggestion. That made a huge dent, not gonna lie. But then when I started doing like the work on like where I could trust people and where it was possible and where things were around that, I made trust mean that people would show up and try if I gave them the right information. I didn't make trust mean somebody's going to be perfect. They're never, ever going to make a mistake. They're never going to hurt me. I made trust mean like, what's real trust? I really sat with that. And I was like, real trust is not that people are perfect. Real trust is that if somebody hurts me, I can go to them and I can hash it out with them. And they're going to try to make that right. They're going to try to course correct. They're going to try to rebuild or regrow with me. And if they don't, then I'll take a big step back in that relationship. I don't have to cut them out of my life, but I can take a step back. And so when I really looked at like what a healthy definition of trust was, and then I really looked for like how there is that in my life and where that's possible and where I'm capable of building relationships like that, and then did that as an auto-suggestion tool for like the 21 days to start that reprogramming, that's where I started seeing a lot of momentum. And then what I also did is I realized that one of the biggest things that was keeping the trust wounding alive was me betraying myself. So there were a lot of places where I would sit and I would say like, okay, my needs don't really matter. It's fine. And I would, put somebody else first and never share my true feelings or my true needs or set a boundary when I really had one and was stirring for one or like needed to say something and didn't. And so because I was like, if I had to score myself from 0 to 100, I was like a 1 out of 100. Like I was so bad at like advocating for myself, considering myself, any of that stuff. And so that made it so that I was betraying myself and keeping that wound alive. So as I worked through those behavioral patterns and started to consider myself more, set better boundaries, then I didn't feel as taken advantage of. Then I didn't feel as like, triggered around trust. And then when I also did that earlier experience and then the auto-suggestion, those three things together, like I just don't feel like I have those trust wounds at all anymore. Like that's not something that's been a part of my reality for a long time. Thank God, because it's a painful thing to feel. But that's really how we heal our way out of it.
Wow, that's so helpful. Thanks for sharing like the intimate experience about, help so many people that are listening right now to know that there is, if they're feeling like I can't trust anybody, everybody's always doing something bad to me, this is sort of a way you can sort of loosen that, not have the all or nothing thinking. and then, give other people grace and also give yourself the grace.
Yeah.
That's amazing, Shara. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks for asking such great questions. I want to just add one last thing for people listening, which is that I really want to highlight trust won't be built in relationships by people being perfect. I think that that's one of the biggest misconceptions. Okay, we're going to heal our trust wounds and then we're going to find people who never, ever tell a white lie or never, forget to follow through on something they promise. That's not, it's not, a reasonable expectation to have, but it's that when we go and we say, hey, this was really important to me and you forgot, and I need us to work on this. And I really want to see growth and for you to remember next time that the needle moves. They may not be perfect again for the whole rest of your life with them, but they may be way better, 80% improvement, and then they forget again. And then there's, you work on that next 20%. As long as you're seeing that needle move and you're still vetting for that experience, because if people never show up and never make an effort, they're really not meant to be in your life. But as long as you see that move consistently, that's where our growth really is.
Wow. That probably empowers FAs a lot too, where they start to speak up and then they see people are actually showing up for something that they've vocalized. So they're like, hey, people actually are trying to, be here for my best interest. They're not all out here to try to, make my life miserable or, make me upset. So that's really, really cool. I love that.
Definitely.
And then we still got to share what do you struggle with? No, it's good. I'm glad we got into that. But what do you struggle with most, or what is an area that you still maybe have a little bit of struggle with, even though you've done a lot of work for becoming secure?
Yeah. So I would say, okay, if it was an area, more generally, an area, okay, an area that I would say I struggle with still would be, I still will feel a little too worried about other people. I'm just it's in my nature to want to make sure everybody's okay all the time, make sure everything's all good. And I probably spend a little bit too much of my life energy in this space of oh my gosh, what about that? And almost I think I have this really intense problem solving mind. In my head, I'm well, if we do this and this and this, then they'll get to here and then everything will be good. And so I'll spend a lot of time with people really close to me, thinking about their lives and how I could plan it so that I could help them with this and this, or if they just did these 3 things. And it's honestly not really that much of my business, even though I love people in my life dearly. If somebody comes to me and wants help or support, okay, then it's my business, then I can share those things. So I'm mindful to not say too much or do too much in that specific area, but I still do that. And it's interesting because one of the things when I was first seeing clients, when I started my coaching practice years and years ago, was I still had boundary work to do. But because people were in my mind, it was oh, I've healed so much and these people are coming for healing. So I'm good and they're having a hard time. So now I need to not have boundaries and just do all these things to try to take care of people. Oh, they want to come in at 9 p.m. Sure, 9 p.m. I'll be there. These things that were really, looking back, not healthy. And that led to me to having a period of time where I wouldn't say I burned out, but I flirted with moving into that territory. And that was a big lesson. And that's still this little tiny pattern in the back of my mind a lot where close family members or friends or things like that, I'll really take on their stuff a little bit too much still. And I have to constantly remind myself, okay, that's not mine, or don't go telling people what I think they should do, or, because I don't want to be that kind of person. Because I wouldn't if people were running around telling me what they think I should do all the time. So I really try to make sure I'm mindful about that. So as a general area, I think I worried a little too much about people. And I think I am a little too sensitive to if I hurt people's feelings sometimes too. I'm oh no, what if that hurt their feelings? Or I may over-explain myself a little bit, not so much with my own behaviors, but in case I think that I hurt somebody, I really over-explain that. And so, that would be a general pattern for sure.
I know it's so tough too, though, when you see someone struggling, and especially if it's something you've gone through.
Yeah,
and then
that's why.
You know exactly the path that gets you to salvation, to happiness. And you're just oh, you want to show it to them so badly. But like you said, I guess if they're not ready to hear it, it's probably not going to go well anyway. And some people don't really like unsolicited advice. But there's such a temptation. I've been there a million times too, where you just like, oh, like you see why they're struggling, you know what that feels like, and you know some little things they can be doing to like improve their lives. But it is tough, to bite your tongue because, like you said, it's usually people that you care about, and you don't want to see anybody you care about struggle, right? So I totally understand that one, but good for you because a lot of people too don't want unsolicited advice. So there could be also a worry that you're, stepping on their toes and them thinking, well, you think I can't run my own life? You think you know better than I do? So it's a bit of a balancing act, but that's not the worst problem to have, that's for sure.
When I first started really healing, I know you went through this too. When I first started really healing, I would I was like young, right? Like this was like, I was like 20 years old or so. And I was like healing, like all these like profound changes. I couldn't believe it. And I was really in the work, like meditating for like hours a day, like constantly like obsessing over like reading, researching, all these things. And I would just tell all of my 20-year-old friends, like, oh my God, I read this book and da-da-da-da, and this and this. And like, for sure, my friends at 20 years old were like, can you shut up? Like, can you calm down? Yeah, like nobody wanted to hear that at 20 years old. And so I was like the queen then of unsolicited advice. And I learned the hard way that that's not a good thing to be, because you'll push people away, unfortunately, who don't really care or don't want to hear or aren't ready to hear that stuff. So I try to be mindful of it now, but that like program, whatever it is, still runs in the background for sure.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, you feel like you found gold and you just want to show everybody and like shake them, but that's not the right way.
So true. Okay, so we'll take a quick break, and then when we come back, we will dive into no contact and dismissive avoidant attachment style. We'll be right back on Can This Be Fixed? So let's take a quick break for our sponsor. Have you ever signed up for a cell phone plan that seemed affordable only to be shocked by how much your bill ends up costing you each month? Because I know that's happened to me. And I feel your pain. Mint Mobile is here to recuse you from those unexpected charges with premium wireless plans starting at just $15 a month. And when they say $15 a month, they actually mean it. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Plus, you can use your own phone and keep your current phone number too. Switch away from overpriced wireless plans and get 3 months of premium wireless access for just $15 a month with Mint Mobile. To get this new customer offer, go to mintmobile.com/Thais, Thais. That's mintmobile.com/Thais, Thais. There's a $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. Welcome back to another episode of Can This Be Fixed? So, obviously, Mike and I shared a lot of our personal shares in here. But in this part of the episode, we are going to talk about a question from Ray's Present 3142, who says, no contact with a DA, ... I made P and was dating a DA for a while. Then they got triggered and we ended things amicably. Even tried being friends, but that didn't work as we both had feelings and my anxiety kicked in. So I felt going no contact was best to see what happens. That's when I started to learn about attachment styles. Day 45 of no contact. I know, still so soon, LOL. And I have no intention of reaching out so that I can show myself respect. But it's been hard, focusing on myself and seeing things from a different view. So at first, he wasn't watching anything I post. Now he does. A few days ago, I put my first selfie since all of this happened up on Snapchat before going out to dinner. After not snapping for a few weeks or watching any of his, and within a few hours of me putting it up, I noticed he unfriended me after seeing it. Not sure if this was a first trigger or what it means, but it's the first sign I've seen since no contact. What can this mean? Are they angry or hurt or trying to get my attention? I am not reacting, LOL. So I'll kick this one off. And I think that, like, honestly, when I first glanced at this question before we started, I missed the part about where he unfriended you. And I was like, oh, look, we're at the 45-day mark, typical for a DA to reach back out or like resurface, because generally they will. If it was a long-term relationship specifically, like a long-term we can constitute as being like past the honeymoon stage, like we'll say, it's on a few months, but you were like, a year, 2 years in, we'll say, moves us into the longer term territory. It's not like you're just dating somebody in a sort of superficial way or not superficial, but just higher level way. You're really starting to get to know them and spending more time together. So when it's more like that, and then we see, okay, you've been dating, now you're in no contact, 45 days go by, and then the moment you post something, he unfriends you. I don't think he's angry that you posted something, but I think that he is trying to get as far away from as possible from anything that will make him feel. So it's pretty well known. And I know I started publishing this like years and years ago, and I know a lot of people know this online, that around the 6-week mark, that's where DAs start to feel no contact. So they're really good at like stuffing things down, repressing things for the first few weeks. They're like, oh, I'm free. I'm out of this relationship. I finally have my freedom. I can spend all this time alone. And they kind of go on this focus area of having that at the beginning of a breakup a lot of the time, especially if they're the ones doing the breaking up specifically. And then after riding that wave, they tend to be around the 6-week mark up to 3 months, depending on how DA they are. They tend to start being in a space where they go, oh, wait, like I kind of miss the person, or I start to have feelings. And a lot of the times during that period of time, they'll reach out indirectly, like by following your social media or sending a text like, hey, or how are you, or these very high level things, or sending a meme, or just, it's like they're reaching out without wanting to actually be vulnerable. But in this particular case, when somebody deletes you or unfriends you in that specific moment, to me, that really reads as a DA having a coping mechanism where they're going, okay, this person's causing me pain. It's hard to see them. It's making my heart ache a little bit, or I miss them. I don't want anything to make me feel. So in order to not feel like I'm missing somebody, or in order to not feel lonely, I'm going to get as far away from this person as possible. And I'm going to do that by getting everything sort of wiped that could keep me in contact with them. So if he knows in that moment that seeing your picture made him like miss you a little bit, then his way of protecting in typical DA fashion is to shut down and shut out. And so that's what I'm really seeing here is he's hurt a little bit. And in order to get as far away from his own emotions as possible, he's trying to get as far away from you as possible, thinking that if I just distance myself from you, then you're not going to make me feel like I'm missing you. And so that's the typical type of reaction I would see in this particular case. And I'm curious, Mike, like if you've ever had a situation where you've been in that kind of experience, or if you have anything you want to add to the question.
Yeah, I think I remember in the past after a breakup, after a while, like probably around the 6-week mark, but just wondering what the person's doing, wondering what they're up to. Are they dating someone new? Have they moved on? Like, do they still think about me? And, probably checking and seeing what was going on there. But I think this person maybe went to do that and then maybe got a little bit of shame or guilt thinking, oh, they saw that I'm looking at their story. So I'm just going to just going to unfriend them or, get off their account. Cause maybe they're too scared to say, hey, like wanting to reinitiate contact, and they just don't know how to say like, hey, I kind of miss you. Like they'd almost rather die than like show that vulnerable side and say, hey, like I haven't seen you in a while. Like what have you been up to type thing. So like you said, I think the easiest thing to do is just to like unfriend, and then you don't have to deal with all those conflicting feelings and, worry about, oh, I need to be vulnerable. I got to take the next step. Unfriending seems like the easiest and kind of cut and dry thing to do. Yeah. And also, through avoidance, kind of get rid of those feelings. Like you said, avoidants do everything they can to avoid uncomfortable feelings. So if that means blocking someone, then they can go back to their life and not thinking about you. I don't know. You could maybe tell this if this is true or not, but I know for myself, and I wonder if this is an avoidant thing or just a me thing. But before, when I was super unhealed, I was very out of sight, out of mind. So if I didn't see the person, I wouldn't feel the connection. I wouldn't feel like, oh, I missed them. I wouldn't think about the old times we had. I was very out of sight, out of mind. So I almost wonder if this is the same with this person. Are they just trying to cut off all feelings and just not be friends anymore? What have you seen like in practice and with DAs that you worked with? Are they very out of sight, out of mind as well?
Generally, yes, for sure. And also, when somebody would make them feel something after a breakup, almost like without exception, if they were not in a place where they were going to like think of like the feelings minus fears kind of dynamic,
Yeah.
if their feelings weren't outweighing their fears, they were really going to give into their fears. So it's almost like if they didn't have feelings that were like, and for the record, for anybody listening, this isn't about like a DA not having enough feelings for you. It's really about like the roots of their fears being so big. So if somebody like has all these fears, fears of being vulnerable, fear of seeming weak or shameful or opening up and getting hurt in some kind of way or not being able to get their needs met or giving up their independence or all these things that they fear, then they're going to go, okay, yeah, I have feelings here, but my fears are greater. I don't want to feel. I'm just going to give into my fears by cutting the person off. So I think it's really that combination for sure, out of sight, out of mind. I also loved what you said earlier about like that sort of shame of, oh, what if they saw that I saw your story? And then getting into a space where those two things combine along with being like, I'm not going to feel anything here. No way. I don't want this person to make me feel. It's like the path of least resistance seems like it's just easier to give into the fears and just get as far away from the person as possible.
Right, right. I almost think this person is gonna like re-add them again at some point in the near future and maybe do the same thing.
Maybe. I have seen that sometimes. I would say less often, but that does happen. That's sometimes like more of like a DA with a secondary FA side doing stuff like that. Because DAs are pretty good at being like, no, I'm not going to put myself in that vulnerable of a position for them to see me do that. But I'm curious from your perspective, did you, when you were DA, what did you feel? Like, I think it's going to be really helpful for people listening. What were you feeling around 6 weeks? Like, if you can share the inside of your world for a minute around the 6-week mark after a breakup, like, oh yeah, I'm free, I'm independent, it's all good for the first few weeks. And then when does it like really set in and what do you start experiencing emotionally? And I'm not talking like, sorry, just one last thing. I'm not talking about like, oh, I dated somebody for 2 months. I'm talking about people you had like real, like more genuine and intense feelings for.
Yeah, longer term relationships. Definitely there's that period of like a weight off your shoulders. You're like, oh, I can be myself again. I don't have to, try to do things that I'm not. It was just, yeah, like a weight off your shoulders. You felt, okay, no one's going to make me feel like I'm not good enough and no one's going to try to change me. It's almost like, you're on vacation again, you got the place to yourself, bachelor pad, like everything's all great. But then after a while you start thinking about, well, there were some actually good moments. Like instead of highlighting on all the negative things and all the ways that you didn't feel good, once you're far enough removed, you could start to think like, hey, like we did have some good times. And you know what, like that was fun when we would have pizza night every Saturday, or that was cool, that vacation we went out on. So I think you start to remember and miss some of the things that you used to have, even some affection or cuddling and whatnot. We start to miss that after a while. And then I think there's just a natural wondering of what the person's doing and have they moved on and do they miss me? Like there's just all these questions you have. But to make that vulnerable move to like, get back in contact with them and just see how they're doing and, ask them how they've been and whatnot, that probably wasn't going to happen. Yeah. For me, that was like, I'll just sit with those feelings of like, hey, I'll remember some of the good, I wonder what they're doing, but I probably wouldn't reach out to, regain contact.
Yeah.
However, I think if they made that vulnerable step, I would actually be kind of receptive, where I'd be like, I'd entertain, talking to them and seeing how they're doing, but I wouldn't reach out on my end.
Yeah. And I think that's like so par for the course and so much of like what I'll often see happening. And I'm sure you've seen this too, tons and tons of times in PDS and stuff, but that's huge. And I do want to say that that's not a, hey, everybody just reach out because the DA might be like really receptive to it. Because I think you explain that so perfectly, but I think that people's natural inclination is to be like, okay, so I should reach out to my DAX. For me, I'm always like, okay, is there anything to show that they're willing to do the work differently? Like, they reach out. Obviously, they're willing to be more vulnerable, or they say, oh yeah, hey, it is nice to hear from you. I've actually been working on myself. Like, you would need to see something that's validating that there's more green flags than red flags, because somebody can, I think a DA can really miss their ex and have moments of really feeling like that and thinking of the good times and being receptive to if the person reached out too, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're willing to get in a relationship again with that person. And I'm curious if you've ever had a moment like that where like you wanted somebody to reach out, but then they did. And then you were like, oh, hold on, I don't want to be in a relationship again, because that's a really common occurrence for a lot of people too. So I'm curious if you can speak to that.
Yeah, there's that fear too. Like you don't want to get kind of sucked back in and then feel those core wounds triggered again. Then you're like, oh man, like I feel trapped and I was out, now I'm sucked back in. There's a bit of that feelings, but I'm trying to think how to rectify that. Like if you're on the other side of it, if you were to just initiate a conversation and be like, hey, just want to have a chat, like I'm not calling you to get back together, but I would love to talk about just some of the things that I think I can only speak on my end. Some of the things that I think I did that might have been a little hard to deal with for the relationship. Are you open to me sharing some of those things with you? So it's like coming to the table and you being accountable for your side of things. And then you get to hear what the other person says, like, hey, was there anything that maybe you thought could have been different, or, that you felt was really hard to deal with? So, because a lot of times DAs think like they're getting the blame for everything. Like they're just terrible relationships. They don't meet people's needs well. They're selfish, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think if you have someone coming to the table and just wanting to end things on good terms and say, hey, this is not a conversation of like get back together, but I feel like there's a few things I wanted to share that I think I want to take accountability for my part, and just wanted to share a few things with you. So I think that during that conversation, you can get a sense of, hey, does this other person have some things to say on their end, and being accountable for some of the things they did, and then maybe start the dialogue.
I love that. I love that. That's like some secret sauce. I love that because it's a good way to feel out if they've grown or are willing to grow. And it's also a good way to, I'm a big believer in closure. I know not everybody can get closure in all situations, and we can find it on our own in that case too. But I'm a huge believer in like making amends, leaving things on a nice note, like doing those sorts of things. And I think it's a really powerful idea to do that, because best case scenario, you have a nice conversation, it rebuilds a connection, both people are accountable and regrow together, and it turns into something beautiful. And worst case scenario, you have a really nice conversation where you got to own your stuff, you got to get some certainty about where that person stands. And it'll be like this sense of, okay, we actually got the closure here at the same time. We got to really put like an amicable end to things, and that feels like a sense of peace. So I love that. That's going to be a new process for Mike's process for how to know where an avoidant is at after a breakup.
Because otherwise, if you're just trying to end the no contact and trying to get them back and like nothing's changed, you'll be back to where you were not too many months later, weeks later. So you want to make sure both people have identified some areas that need to be worked on before they go forward again. Right.
I love that.
Yeah.
So hopefully this answered your question for today, raised, present, or anybody listening. And that's it. If you are new here, welcome, and please follow us on YouTube if you're just listening on audio, or check us out if you're on YouTube on Apple or Spotify or iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts at. And you can check out Mike's Instagram if you want to connect with Mike in the social media in the links below. And if you want to check out PDS and come be a member of one of our programs and join any of our free trials that we're running right now for a limited time, I will put the link to that as well down below. Thank you so much for stopping by and listening. Thank you, Mike, for being such an amazing co-host, and we'll see you next week. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Share it with friends and family who are on their journey of personal development and growth, and thank you for listening. Next week, we'll be back with more insights to guide you on your journey. And until then, keep practicing our tools and strategies to change your subconscious mind, and apply some of the powerful learnings from this podcast so that you experience real life transformation.